Chapter 1, page 3. It may be well to state here that, having been reared by a kind aunt in Pennsylvania, whose usefulness with the sick was continually sought, I early conceived a liking for and sought every opportunity to relieve the sufferings of others. She took courses in theory, chemistry, therapeutics, anatomy, medical jurisprudence, obstetrics, diseases of women and children, physiology, and hygiene. Her coursework called for 17 weeks of study for 30 or more hours per week during the first year of instruction. Students were also required to apprentice for physicians. In addition to her hefty workload, Rebecca dealt with a heartbreaking loss. Her first husband, Wyatt Lee, a former slave, died of tuberculosis while she was in school. Rebecca pressed on, and by February 1864, she and two white classmates, Mary Lockwood Allen and Elizabeth Kimball, had finished the thesis papers required to move to the final stage of the program. Now they had to complete oral examinations in front of 4 faculty members. Although each young woman was ultimately recommended for graduation, the faculty committee claimed there were shortcomings in Rebecca's education and that she had made slow progress during her time there. They wrote, "Some of us have hesitated very seriously in recommending her." Despite such comments, the college's board of trustees decided she was worthy of graduating and granted her the degree. This made Rebecca the first African American woman medical doctor. Still, even as she graduated, the school attached her race to her name. They referred to her as Mrs. Rebecca Lee Negress. After graduation, Rebecca stayed in Boston to practice medicine as well as seek further training. She wanted to be well informed and provide the best possible care for her patients. Like her aunt had done, Rebecca committed herself to caring for those who needed the most help. She focused on women's and children's issues, especially among the less fortunate. In 1865, when the Civil War ended, she moved to Richmond, Virginia to do what she saw as, quote, real missionary work. She worked with the Freedmen's Bureau, an agency created by Congress to help millions of formerly enslaved Africans and poor whites in the South recover from enslavement and the devastation caused by the war. Providing this type of assistance was deeply personal to Rebecca. Her second husband, Arthur Crumpler, was a former fugitive slave from Southampton County, Virginia. The Freedmen's Bureau provided food and housing, established schools, and offered legal and medical aid to people like Arthur. This was important because most African Americans had no access to health care while enslaved. After emancipation, Rebecca and other African American physicians sprang into action to serve the people who had been enslaved. The rising need for more doctors to care for newly freed Black people inspired others to gain medical training. The first African American medical schools in the United States, such as Howard University Medical School in Washington, D.C., were established to train Black people for careers as doctors. Although African American doctors were essential after the war, they were usually shunned. Rebecca faced much discrimination in Richmond, Virginia, the old capital of the Confederacy. Various sources say that, quote, men doctors snubbed Rebecca, druggists balked at filling her prescriptions, and some people wisecracked that the MD behind her name stood for nothing more than mule driver. Rebecca was not deterred by such challenges. Her calling to serve was bigger than the racist and sexist bullies she encountered. Caring for the sick was the most important thing in her life. She treated countless people, regardless of their class, among Richmond's population of more than 30,000 people of color. By 1869, Rebecca had returned to Boston, where she had trained to become a doctor. She lived and practiced medicine on Beacon Hill, a mainly African American neighborhood, before moving to Hyde Park, Massachusetts in 1880. While no longer actively practicing medicine, Rebecca continued making contributions to society. 3 years later, she published a book of medical discourse, one of the first publications written by an African American about medicine. It was also the only text written by a woman physician in the 19th century. The book showed Rebecca's dedication to society's most vulnerable people, providing advice on the medical care of women and children. The trailblazing doctor died in 1895, but her legacy endured. The Rebecca Lee Society, one of the first medical societies for African American women, was named after her, and her old home in Boston is a stop on the Women's Heritage Trail. The Rebecca Lee Pre-Health Society at Syracuse University is also named as a nod to her remarkable life. The goal of this group is to help students succeed in medicine by providing resources and mentors. Rebecca's support of homeopathy and positive impact on how other physicians helped prevent disease. Homeo means same. Homeopathic medicine calls for exposing healthy patients to certain illnesses in very small doses to boost their immunity from the same sickness. This approach is used today when treating many sicknesses such as the flu. Explore more. Search online at your local library to learn about the first African American nurse, Mary Eliza Mahoney, and other early pioneers in medicine. Tips for you. Rebecca Crumpler's aunt inspired her to pursue a career in medicine. Who in your family inspires you? Write them a thank you note and explain why you appreciate what they do. Page 9. Annie Turnbow Malone, 1869 to 1957. Annie Turnbow Malone was a chemist and businesswoman whose brilliant achievements in the beauty industry helped her become the first African American female millionaire. She developed a successful line of personal hygiene and beauty products designed especially for Black women. She also held the first U.S. patent for a hot comb. Annie's most popular product was a potion she called the Wonderful Hair Grower. Her desire to educate others and expand her business inspired her to build the famous Poro College of St. Louis. This cosmetology school and its franchises employed about 75,000 women in North and South America, Africa, and the Philippines. Annie's business was the first global African American beauty and hair care brand. Annie's mother and father had been enslaved. Her father, Robert Turnbow, fought for the Union during the Civil War. Her mother, Isabella, escaped with their children from Kentucky, where slavery was still permitted. By the way of the Ohio River, they found safety in Metropolis, Illinois, where Annie was born. Annie was the 10th of 11 children. She was raised by an older sister after their parents died. Annie showed promise in her science classes, but she had to leave high school because she was often sick. She had always been fascinated by hair. Inspired by an aunt who specialized in working with herbs, young Annie began experimenting with different ingredients to create new hair care products for Black women. Annie grew up during a time when African American women were starting to straighten their hair, rather than wear it in natural styles, such as braided cornrows. This was because American society associated those styles with plantation work. Most Blacks simply wanted to be treated as equal to white people. Others felt pressure to look more like white people to get jobs. In some cases, Black people with straighter or wavy hair were treated better than those with curlier hair. For this reason, straightened hair became a symbol of success and sophistication for many Black communities. This trend certainly influenced Annie's early products. Hair care was also personal for the budding entrepreneur. Annie saw women using bacon grease, heavy oils, and butter to achieve their uncoiled looks. Others used combinations of lye and potatoes. She knew these methods damaged the hair and scalp. She also knew that harsh, alcohol-based potions destroyed their hair follicles and skin. She developed a line of less damaging hair straightening and growth stimulating hair products and began selling them door to door. Her motto for the Wonderful Hair Grower was, quote, "Clean scalps mean clean bodies." In 1902, Annie brought along her flair for business when she moved to St. Louis, Missouri. Not only did St. Louis host the World's Fair that year, it was also home to a thriving African American population. Many had migrated from the South to find work and escape racial terror. The 25-year-old entrepreneur took advantage of the new opportunities and opened a store. Her customers liked her products so much that she decided to expand her business. Annie hired assistants and trained them to go door to door to distribute her products all over the country. She and her team also traveled to provide free hair treatments and tutorials at African American churches, women's social clubs, and community centers. The tours helped women who may not have otherwise had access to professional hair services, but they were dangerous to Annie and her employees. White residents of many cities, especially in the South, tormented African American visitors. Still, Annie felt her work was worth the risk. She organized press conferences and advertised in black newspapers. Annie's work paid off. Her recruits recruited other recruits, and they recruited others, and so on. They appreciated the opportunity to earn money, and Annie rewarded good work with prizes like diamond rings. Poro College is more than a mere business enterprise fostering ideals of personal beauty and tidiness, self-respect, thrift, and industry, and touching the lives of millions. Annie also made sure that her agents had access to the latest hair care technology, such as pressing, curling, and waving irons, combs, and crimpers in various sizes. Her enterprise grew rapidly and even attracted famous guitarist Chuck Berry before he made it big in music. One of her most celebrated trainees was Madam C.J. Walker, a former washerwoman who eventually established her own company that was similar to Annie's. While Walker is often thought of as the first African American female millionaire, Annie actually reached the rank earlier. People often confuse the brands because Walker launched a product called Wonderful Hair Straightener, and irritated Annie called Walker's concoction a fraudulent imitation. To discourage others from mimicking her products and sales tactics, in 1906 she trademarked her goods and services under the name Poro. Many people have suggested that she took the name from a West African group known for its emphasis on improving one's looks, body, and spirit. One of Annie's promotional booklets declares, quote, "The name Poro has come to stand as a mark of our service to the race, a service that is economic, inspirational, and religious." Annie's creative and intellectual ideas came together in her most important achievement, Poro College. In 1918, as her business boomed, she oversaw the openings of a state-of-the-art facility in St. Louis's elite African American neighborhood. The facility contained the business's office, manufacturing headquarters, a cosmetology training center, and halls for civic, religious, and social events. Products were shipped directly from this facility. Annie's goal was for orders to be shipped the same day they were placed. She saw her property as a community space and made it available for African American events that white-owned hotels and other venues refused to host. Several important organizations, including Booker T. Washington's National Negro Business League, used it for meetings and parties. Annie was a champion of social responsibility. With 75,000 agents around the world and Poro schools in 32 cities, she had earned an estimated of $14 million. She shared the money with employees, family, YMCAs, and other African American colleges. She donated $25,000 to Tuskegee Institute and the same amount to Howard University School of Medicine. She gave her agents cash for buying homes and maintained tennis courts for employee use. Scarcity caused by the Great Depression, combined with Annie's generosity with her family, employees, and community, crippled her finances. Her husband attempted to take half her wealth in court during their divorce, but he was awarded only $20,000. Annie was forced to leave her cherished property and move her business to Chicago in 1930. A former employee took her to court claiming that Annie had stolen her ideas. Several tax disputes with the U.S. government made her situation even worse. As a result of so many misfortunes, Annie's reputation began to fall. Annie's sinking career helped make room for Madam C.J. Walker's popularity. Buyers loved the rag to riches story Walker used to promote her brand. Her advertisements featured attractive and glitzy photographs of herself. They caught the attention of customers who wanted to be part of the glamorous styles of the new Negro Renaissance. Walker's astonishing financial success encouraged white beauty companies to imitate her sales tactics. Walter began to overshadow her teacher. She improved upon the hot comb Annie had patented by widening the teeth to make it work better on black people's hair. These setbacks did not stop Annie. She continued to work on her business until she died in 1957 at the age of 87. By that time, though, most of her money was gone. She had no children, so her estate, valued at $100,000, was left to her nieces and nephews. Long before America began to embrace the idea of African Americans as full citizens, let alone as beauty customers, Annie offered face powders in 5 different shades of brown. Not long after the end of slavery, Annie provided respectable and profitable work for black women who would otherwise have had few employment options. She showed that her hair care and cosmetology could be passed to financial success and thus freedom. Annie's legacy goes beyond her role as a businesswoman. Her commitment to her employees' welfare and to her community set an example for future business leaders. The St. Louis Colored Orphans Home was renamed the Annie Turnbow Malone Children and Family Service Center, and it continues to provide support for the city's youth. The street on which it is located is named in her honor. Explore more. Want to know Annie better? Visit www.freemaninstitute.com/porohtm. Tips for you. Annie Malone rewarded her employees good work. What's something you do well that makes people's lives better? Cook, do hair, babysit? Do it this week. Then give yourself a treat or a tip based on how well you think you did. Page 17. Bessie Coleman, 1892 to 1912. Bessie Coleman's mastery of mechanics, technology, and aviation fueled her quest to empower African Americans in the air and on the ground. Bessie was the first black woman with a pilot's license, and she used her talent and popularity as an aviatrix stunt performer to create change. Although she only lived to be 34 years of age, her crowd-stirring flights, international merit awards, and deep desire to teach others firmly set her legacy as a pioneer who flew above barriers. Bessie was born on January 26, 1892 in Atlanta, Texas, one of 13 children. Like many poor Southern black families at the time, hers picked cotton to get by. Her mother made sure the children took advantage of a traveling library that stopped in town a few times a year. Because of this, Bessie read often and developed a big imagination. She finished high school and even went on to college, which was rare for most Americans during the early 1900s. She worked hard as a laundress, saved her money, and enrolled in Oklahoma's Langston Industrial College, now known as Langston University. Unfortunately, she had to leave college after just one semester when her money ran out. She decided to head for Chicago. Many African Americans were moving there to escape the racial violence and lack of employment that stained the South. That turned out to be a good decision. Chicago offered opportunity and a lively network. In 1915, she enrolled in the Burnham School of Beauty Culture, where she took a course in manicuring. Soon after, she became known as the best manicurist in Black Chicago, impressing people with her speed and skill. Male customers waited to sit at the stunning young woman's table. She soon became a nail specialist at the White Sox barbershop owned by the trainer of Chicago's American League Baseball Club. But Chicago was not perfect. Although racism was mostly associated with the South, it existed all over the country. In the summer of 1919, a terrible riot broke out in the city after a group of whites stoned and drowned an African-American boy whose raft had drifted into an area of Lake Michigan designed for white use only. It took the National Guard 4 days to restore order in the city. During that time, 38 people died, hundreds were injured, and countless homes were destroyed. Bessie observed how racism hurt African Americans in other ways too. She saw her brothers go off to serve the United States in World War I, yet be treated as second-class citizens when they returned. This never sat well with her. Seeing images of planes and news stories about the war, Bessie imagined that aviation might be a way to create a better life for herself and others like her. Her brothers shared stories about their time in France, noting that French women could learn to fly and that she could not. She decided to prove them wrong. She applied for flight schools across the United States. None accepted her because of her race and gender. Bessie was a big fan of the black newspaper, the Chicago Defender, and had become friends with its founder, Robert Abbott. He suggested she try getting into an aviation school in France. She began taking French classes at night so she could complete her applications. In November 1920, with the savings from her manicurist job and her job in a chili parlor, Coleman left Chicago and took a boat to France. There, she was accepted by the Cauldron Brothers School of Aviation. In flight school, she learned looping, tailspins, and landing. She also learned how dangerous flying could be when a classmate died in an accident. Coleman even had to sign a waiver stating she knew she could die if something went wrong. But Bessie didn't let the risk stop her. On June 15, 1921, she received her international pilot's license from the Federation of Aeronautic International in France. She was the first American of any race or gender to do so. She had learned all about plane engines and parts and proven herself capable of a wide range of operational skills and life-saving air maneuvers. When she returned to the States on an ocean liner, reporters from several national African-American newspapers eagerly welcomed her. This was the beginning of her rise to fame. Despite the warm welcome from the newspaper reporters, many African Americans did not have a positive view of aviation. Just weeks before Bessie had earned her pilot's license, the Tulsa race riot took place in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The Greenwood district of Tulsa had been known as Black Wall Street because of its thriving banks, businesses, and successful African American residents. However, on June 1st, 1921, a mob of white people launched a full-scale assault on the district, which ended with white pilots dropping bombs on the community. The incident left dozens dead and countless more without homes. This was the first time airplanes had ever been used in an attack on U.S. soil. The tragedy caused many black people to distrust planes and pilots. Furthermore, American aviation was still not available to most blacks. Bessie wanted to change this. While in France, she had attended the W.E.B. Du Bois' Second Pan-African Congress in Paris. Du Bois was an African-American scholar and activist, used the meeting to promote unity for Africans around the world. Bessie decided then to use her flights to honor and promote African-American causes. She wanted to purchase her own plane and open a black flight school. Despite her best efforts, commercial aviation companies refused to hire her, and plane suppliers refused to sell to her. She again turned to Europe for opportunities. She visited France, Germany, Holland, and Switzerland, studying with famous World War I master pilots and plane designers. She came back to the United States, and even more remarkable aviatrix, who could fly airplanes as well as war-tested veterinarians. When she arrived in New York in August 1922, the New York Times printed that she was, quote, leading French and Dutch aviators as one of the best flyers they had seen. She told the press she planned to continue flying to inspire her people. People began to call her Queen Bess, and she was offered movie roles. She accepted one, believing it would boost her career. However, she backed out when she learned she would have to appear in torn clothing with a walking stick and a sack on her back. She refused to play out negative stereotypes of African Americans. Black celebrities cheered her on. In fact, the cast of Shuffle Along, a highly popular Broadway play that later starred Paul Robeson and Bessie's friend Josephine Baker, presented her with a silver trophy cup to acknowledge her hard work and determination. Bessie gave the cup to her mother to thank her for the sacrifices she had made for her children. Bessie arranged numerous air shows to raise money for her flight school. In an air show, pilots demonstrate aerial maneuvers and tricks to entertain an audience. Bessie's first air show took place on September 3, 1922 at Garden City in Long Island, New York. She dedicated her performance to the 15th Infantry Regiment, one of the first African-American brigades sent to France during World War I. A band played the Star-Spangled Banner, and she was escorted to her plane, which she had borrowed from a rental company. She performed spirals and loops, and an officer in the Universal Negro Improvement Association parachuted from the wing of her plane. The crowd burst into excited applause. Bessie ended the show by taking passengers for a ride for $5 each. Her second exhibition was at the annual Tri-State Fair in Memphis, Tennessee, where she was the main opening day attraction. When her plane faltered and stopped midair, she amazed the crowd with a fast recovery. Her third exhibition was in her beloved Chicago, where 2,000 people gathered at a checkerboard field, a popular flight facility in one of America's biggest cities. She dedicated that performance to an African American military group, the 8th Infantry Regiment. Her favorite newspaper, the Chicago Defender, celebrated her as, quote, the only race aviatrix in the world. Bessie's sister Georgia sat with her in the cockpit in a colorful costume that Bessie had bought for her. Bessie announced that her sister would parachute from 2,000 feet, but Georgia refused. A niece recalled them arguing when Georgia fussing, quote, I don't care what you've bought. I am not jumping out of no plane. The audience cheered when Queen Bess landed perfectly, despite a near crash earlier in the show. Now known as Brave Bessie, her career continued to soar. Queen Bess appealed to almost everybody. She was attractive and petite and fun to watch. Her shows with their aerial acrobatics, wing walking, parachuting, and diving drew enormous crowds. They were also risky. By 1923, she had finally raised enough money to purchase her own plane, a surplus military, quote, Jenny. She was going to use her prized plane to drop promotional materials for a tire company from the sky. Unfortunately, her plane's motor stopped moments after her ascent. It crashed into the ground and Bessie suffered a broken leg, fragmented ribs, and several cuts to her face. She proved her tough spirit when she told a reporter, quote, tell the world I'm coming back. It took her 3 months in the hospital and several more rest and recovery, but she returned to flying just as she'd promised. While she recuperated, she lectured at the YMCA to bring in much-needed money. She also enjoyed Chicago's society life and mingled with stars such as singer-dancer Josephine Baker and actor William Bojangles Robinson. Baker and Bessie became good friends, chatting easily in French. Inspired by Bessie, Baker, too, went to France to learn to fly. Bessie's comeback performance was scheduled to take place at the State Fairgrounds in Columbus, Ohio, on the day when the Ku Klux Klan was also holding a celebration at that venue. Bessie's performance was canceled because of all-day rain, but the KKK's event went ahead. Bessie rescheduled her performance and had a successful show. She then decided it was time to tour the South and raise funds for her longtime dream of opening an African-American flight school. Bessie was not afraid of racism in the South. As far as she was concerned, it existed everywhere. On June 21st, 1925, she held a showcase in her home state of Texas to commemorate Juneteenth, a holiday celebrating the emancipation of the enslaved. She refused to follow rules that called for separate entrances for African Americans and whites. Instead, she demanded one entrance for all. The Houston Informer reported that it was, quote, the best time colored public of the South had been the first time colored public of the South had been given the opportunity to fly. At one show on her tour, a parachutist decided not to jump, so Bessie strapped on the gear and did it herself. She was in high demand and made appearances in cities all over the South. Between shows, she visited Black churches and theaters to speak about their time overseas and her daredevil career. She also showed films on her adventures. Bessie was determined to open a flight school. While touring in Florida, she opened a beauty shop to help fund her dream. In a letter to her sister, she said the business had made almost enough money to build the school. Her exhibitions were starting to bring in more revenue too. Her next show was scheduled for May 1st, 1926 in Jacksonville, Florida. This was the same year that historian Carter D. Woodson founded Negro History Week, now called Black History Month. When things took a terrible turn. On April 30th, 1926, Bessie and her mechanic, a white man named William Willis, took their plane for a test run. Willis was piloting while Bessie scooped out the ground and planned the show while Bessie scoped out the ground and planned the show from the passenger seat. A loose wrench became stuck in the engine and Willis lost control. During this time, most planes had no roofs. Bessie and Willis fell to their deaths. People were heartbroken, and many communities across the country held memorials. Famous activist Ida B. Wells gave the eulogy at Bessie's funeral in Chicago. A group of uniformed pallbearers, who were veterans of the African 8th Infantry Regiment, escorted her U.S. flag-covered casket to its final resting place. Bessie never saw her school open during her lifetime, but Lieutenant William J. Powell established the Bessie Coleman Aero Club in Los Angeles in 1929. By 1977, a group of black female pilots formed the Bessie Coleman Aviators Club, and in 1995, the U.S. Postal Service released the Bessie Coleman stamp. The Chicago O'Hare Airport address is 1000 Bessie Coleman Drive. Each year on the anniversary of her death, African American pilots fly over her grave and drop flowers in her honor. Explore more. Check out all the African American heritage stamps offered at the United States Postal Service. Head to an office near you or find them at www.usps.gov. Tips for you. Talk to your parents about taking an online or classroom course to learn a new language. Flying around the world like Bessie requires talking all kinds of different people from different places.